Hi, my name is Kim Daniels, and I'm with Georgetown's initiative on Catholic social thought and public life. We're so excited to be a part of the Teach-In this year. I'm here to tell you a little bit about our program, and in particular about our programs for young people. We were launched in 2013, just 7 years ago, as an effort to bring Catholic social thought to the center of our nation's capital and as an integral part of Georgetown University, where we sit in the president's office in Healy Hall. We are a small but nimble organization, which means that we can respond to events as they happen, and we can put on dialogues and gatherings about things that are happening right now. We've had over 100 gatherings with more than 90,000 people, and we've had over 340 diverse leaders participate in these gatherings, including a US president, senators, cardinals, representatives, journalists, religious and community leaders, academics and policy experts, but most of all, people from the grassroots, Catholics who are leading on the ground, young and old, from across the country. Our mission is to share Catholic social thought and advance the leadership of Pope Francis at the intersection of faith and politics. Our desire is to promote principle and civil dialogue on faith and public life, to share and apply Catholic social thought at Georgetown, in Washington, and beyond, and to build bridges across religious, ideological, political, and other divisions. We're here to encourage a new generation of lay leaders to look to Catholic social thought to advance the common good. We bring together young leaders in particular in two programs: our Salt and Light gatherings for young adults under 40, and our Latino leaders gatherings. Our final main lane of operation is our national convenings for Catholic leaders. We've had these gatherings which bring together leading Catholics from across the country and from a variety of different areas of the church and in politics to talk about a variety of different crucial issues that are at the center of our public life today, including responses to poverty, overcoming polarization in our church and nation, sharing Catholic social thought, a convening we did with the Vatican, and on lay leadership in response to the clergy sexual abuse crisis. In 7 years, we've gone from an untested idea to a respected center of dialogue in our nation's capital, a unique source of encouragement for young leaders, and a convener of leading Catholics on critical issues for our church and nation. Now let me tell you a little bit more about our Salt and Light program. The initiative has focused on a simple but neglected idea: bring young people together to encourage them to see their Catholic faith as an asset in their life and in their work. We've held over 20 gatherings with over 10,000 young people expressing interest in these gatherings over the past 7 years, and we get extensive media coverage for them, which leverages their impact and brings our ideas into public life more broadly. We also have Latino leader gatherings, which is an effort to bring together and encourage young Latino leaders in Washington to build relationships and explore links between their Latino identity, their faith, Catholic social thought, and their lives. We've held 13 gatherings with over 7,500 young people expressing interest in these Latino leaders gatherings over the past 7 years, offering the potential of building a community of young Latino leaders that sees their faith as important for their life and work. With both the Salt and Light gatherings and the Latino Leaders Program, we've learned to reach out to young people, to have them be part of advisory groups that help us understand what we can best do to bring the most people into our gatherings. We've learned to partner with the Archdiocese of Washington's Theology on Tap program and other efforts to make sure that we're reaching as broad a network of young people as possible. We've also learned that it's important to have time to gather together when we can, to build bridges across different kinds of groups here in Washington and beyond, and to get together to be sure that we can put Catholic social thought at the center of our lives and work. And with that, we're going to share some examples of our work with young people in the video clips to follow.
At the beginning of this, I had a brother who'd been disabled, and he went into the hospital around the 4th or 5th of March and subsequently died on the 19th. So as all of this is beginning, so this has also been a time. So on Easter morning, my sisters and my mother and I got up at the crack of dawn, and we had a very, very beautiful experience of going to the tomb. And so even though I know that we still feel like we're somewhere in between Good Friday and Resurrection, that morning, I really had a moment. And so I just think there's also an opportunity to be more vulnerable, to be with our families in ways that we haven't been before, and to be open to that.
I've been encouraged by a lot of the Catholic involvement that I've seen recently. And I think when you mentioned, Kim, the resources that Catholics can bring to this movement and to this conversation, we have Catholic social teaching, right? We have themes that teach us how to talk about what it means to care for human life, what it means to care for marginalized communities, what it means to be a pro-life faith tradition, right? And I think that we're starting to see a lot of Catholics use their faith and show up to these movements. And I think that is so powerful because we have the ability to create a space where we can say, hey, Black Lives Matter, and here's what Catholics should be doing. Here's what Catholics should be doing during a global pandemic to help these marginalized communities.
Environmental degradation. My wife grew up in a community called La Villita in Chicago, Little Village. Just a few weeks ago, in the midst of the pandemic, a coal plant that she grew up next to about 6 blocks down the street, the city and a developer that bought that coal plant decided in the midst of a pandemic to demolish one of the smokestacks. It sent waves, a tsunami of dust through this beautiful immigrant community. And people were forced to breathe in dust and toxins for 2 weeks. People died. And to do this in the middle of a pandemic, when people are fighting for their lives against a virus that attacks our respiratory systems, just shows all the odds that are up against people of color.
Bishop Mark Seid, in his pastoral letter, had the power to name white supremacy, had the power to name racism within that context of the sins of the church in the past, of the sins of the church in the now, in the present. And so certainly we need to say that Black Lives Matter, because unless Black Lives Matter, all of our lives won't matter, right? We have to be able to see how all of these issues are interconnected, not only in the political context, but certainly in our church context, as JD was mentioning before.
I think what is telling about this moment in terms of privilege, right, is the ways in which the history of the church, its engagement with white supremacy, not simply its complicity, but agency in the social construction, propagation, and maintenance of white supremacy is so unknown to so many people, yet it's documented everywhere. We have left this history intact for the most part. We've just ignored the experiences of Black Catholics. But the reality is, because you cannot tell Black Catholic history without confronting the church's largely unreconciled histories of slavery, segregation, and colonialism.
I talked to Dylan Corbett of Hope Border Institute for my piece today, and he was mentioning, all of these issues that have affected that young Latinos see affecting generations before them for so long, and they're still not fixed. So I think there's, they're saying, well, if I've been supporting you for such a long time and you still haven't fixed it, what makes me think that if voting for you will fix it in the future for me, or, even for the people in my surroundings?
What does this mean for being a faithful citizen here in the United States? I think one of the things that's so difficult about it is it means that I have to position myself to consider not only my fellow citizens, but those within my community who aren't citizens, who don't have the right to vote, who don't have a voice. And am I considering their basic rights, considering them as part of the common good that we're working for?
The bishops have emphasized the issue of abortion as being the preeminent issue. I don't think there's any bishop that I know of in the United States or anywhere else who doesn't think that abortion is wrong, that doesn't think that the church has something to say about this. But I think what's important for understanding the bishop's position is that saying that an issue is a priority is not saying it's the only thing that matters, right? There are lots of issues that matter. There are lots of issues that are urgent. But the question, I think, then becomes, if we're weighing that against other issues, what could possibly be the counterbalance?
Our Salt and Light gatherings and Latino leader gatherings, I think, are probably the most important thing the initiative does, but it's not the most visible work we do. In some ways, we're most known for large public dialogues at the intersection of faith and public life. that bring people together with diverse perspectives across the lines of partisanship, ideology, ecclesiology, race and gender, age. We have done almost 100 of these, and as Kim said, drawn almost 100,000 people. And our conviction is that Catholic social thought, its principles, offer an alternative to the paralysis and the polarization that grip our capital and our country. When we started the initiative 7 years ago, we had no idea how wounded our church would be by the recurrence of the sexual abuse crisis, how broken, how hurting our nation would be as we cope with the pandemic of racial reckoning and economic collapse. And we think the initiative, and frankly, the teach-in, offers an alternative to the stalemate and the bitterness and the emptiness of American life, and frankly, some parts of the church. We do some things consistently. We try and lift up the leadership of Pope Francis. We try and share the principles of Catholic social teaching on immigration and racial justice and environmental justice. When our church was hurt so badly again by sexual abuse, we stepped up with 10 dialogues on what lay people can do to demand accountability and transparency and a renewal of our faith and new kinds of leadership. We focused on COVID, not the politics of COVID, but the moral, the human dimensions of COVID. We even had a premiere of a film on Dorothy Day, where we filled Gaston Hall and had Dorothy's granddaughter and the person who edited her diaries. You will see in what follows, we get big shots and ordinary folks. We have the President of the United States, and we have somebody who worked in the Georgetown cafeteria. But most of all, we have people who take the principles of Catholic social teaching and show how they can make things better in a hurting church and in a wounded country.
We took the big decision, a heartbreaking decision, to lay off all of our employees and stay open, my son, my husband, and myself. Then with the help of all the communities, our regular customers and our neighbors, we were able to open back the restaurant and bring back 4 employees, which they have little children's. And that brought to our attention, my husband and I, that so many documented people around the United States will be losing their their jobs and will not be able to get anything, the aid that the government was supposed to help.
I talk a lot about social connection or social fragmentation. And he said to me, you know, social connection is not really strong enough. Even interdependence is not strong enough. Solidarity is strong enough. And solidarity is, as I said in that column, an active virtue. It's a call to participation. It's an active sense that we belong to each other and that we have an obligation to actually serve one another in aggressive ways.
The core principle of Catholic social thought is both simple and radical. It is the equal dignity of every person. If this doesn't remind us of that, I do not know what will. And we need to understand that we need a lot of community institutions to work. We need a government that works, we need a healthcare system that works, and we need community institutions that work.
I read a quote this morning from the Italian Cardinal Archbishop of Genoa, who was the first person to close the churches and schools in Italy. And he talked about making decisions and, you know, the people who felt they were brighter and smarter. And he looked up and he said, genius without heart is less effective. And I think we have a responsibility that when decisions are made personal and collective, that they're not made without heart. And that's where Catholic social teaching will be so helpful.
We are tired of the racism in our streets and structures, an open wound, a sin against you, taking the lives and denying the dignity of your children. We are called to mourn, to lament. May the dead rest in your peace. May our acts of solidarity and justice with the living be a memorial to those who have died.
First of all, let me say that the racial justice movement and the pro-life movement are not mere politics. It's not left, right, conservative, progressive. That is not what animates the movement. The movement is animated by the gospel imperative that we must defend the vulnerable and the oppressed. Okay? If you are coming into these movements from simply the political, then you've missed the point.
In terms of something to do, I have a nephew who is paralyzed from being shot in the back by the police, whose only crime was walking away from the police. And Gloria mentioned a little bit earlier about when a mother looks and saw George Floyd crying and lamenting about and calling on his mother, on his deceased mother. I mean, that touched a lot of us, a lot of different ways. But it touched my sister-in-law in a completely different way. And I think if that fact is true, then the opposite is true too. If we are not aware of what's happening in our communities, then we won't be close to the situation at all. If we are able to be more attuned, to listen, as Gloria was mentioned earlier, to be more concerned about what's happening with our brothers and sisters, and to go across the railroad tracks to accompany them as they look for ways to might be able to improve their lives in their neighborhoods and their communities.
I've come to the conclusion that the center of all of this is a kind of idolatry that has developed among many American Catholic communities, where we fetishize the idea of social justice, we fetishize the fetus, we fetishize our prestigious schools, at the expense of realizing that if justice is going to come, it's going to cost us something. So the same people who are willing to march on Washington for March for Life is bewildered by why people are taking to the streets right now for police brutality. The same people who were so curious about Georgetown and slaveholding are the same ones who are apoplectic when our students wanted to spend $54 a year for reparations. So at this point, this conversation has been had many, many times, but there has never been a real movement to say, what are we willing to pay?
If we're talking about natural, justice or ecological justice, what we're talking about is the need to maintain an environment which enables the work of creation, everything in there to thrive. And that means we need to respect the water bodies, the forests, the trees, and all of that, so that these can thrive. And related with this, if we've seen natural ecology, the other thing that followed quickly from John Paul II was human ecology. The social conditions in which we live in, the type of social structures and social systems which enable people, you just started this inviting us to prayer about what has just happened in Minneapolis. What is that? It's just a cry for people to recognize that every human being requires a minimum of social conditions to enable him to live and live successfully and happily. And when this is not there, and when the earth is abused, then the Pope says that two elements are crying to us, inseparably, the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor.
It's very important for folks to understand that if you're not talking about racial justice and economic justice as part of climate justice, then you're just talking about veganism, right? Then you're just talking about being a vegetarian, right? You're not really talking about fundamentally what the inherent problems in our society are. And it's important for us to ensure that when you're lifting up wanting to do climate change, there also has to be solidarity with wanting economic justice. There also has to be solidarity with the fact that Black lives do matter, right? And so those actions are difficult. They're very difficult because they cause us to have to inherently look in and ask ourselves, what do I believe? Right? And what are the shifts and the teachings and the knowledge that I have to gain to change my perspective?
I was very interested in how the Democratic National Convention talked about faith. Instead of making some sort of direct, aggressive appeal, it seemed like they were really playing up the fact that Biden is religious. He's very devout as a Catholic. And they were saying that Joe Biden, as a religious person, understands the values of religious voters. And it's not just abortion or religious freedom. It's sort of, how does faith inform your views on immigration or climate change or the protests that are going on across the country? Whereas the next week when we heard the Republicans talking about Trump, there was very little effort made to say this is a religious dude or he understands sort of what it means to sit in a pew every Sunday. It was much more that this man, Donald Trump, is going to defend you. It was much more about those traditional religious topics of abortion rights, religious freedom policy.
Look, it's fine to be a Democrat, it's fine to be a Republican, but that should not be part of your identity. And I think the reason why that's important is because our political landscape seems to kind of separate social justice and moral order as if they're mutually exclusive. So if you're on the left, then you care about social justice. If you're on the right, that you care about moral order. But unless you disentangle your identity from partisanship and ideological tribes, you miss the fact that Christians, at least, are supposed to be about both. So we need to dismantle that false dichotomy, because people of faith have to be willing to attack racial justice while promoting a strong family ethic and the sanctity of life.
The pandemic has disrupted everybody's lives. A lot of people in this country are reevaluating the way that they think about racism and racial injustice. And I think that you're starting to see that have an impact on the relationship between white evangelicals and white Catholics and the Trump administration and President Trump.
Many evangelicals, white evangelicals, have adopted tactics that are fundamentally inconsistent with their view of human dignity, which is the way that others are treated, the causes you adopt. This is the central Christian contribution to our political dialogue over the hundreds of years of American history, is this view that human beings, that no insignificant person was ever born.
We see that among white evangelical Protestant voters, the vast majority say that they would vote for Trump if the election were held today. At the other end of the spectrum, the vast majority of Black Protestants, that 92%, say that they would vote for Biden if the election were held today. You also see these familiar breaks among Catholics. About 6 in 10 white Catholic voters say they would vote for Trump. And on the other end, 65% of Hispanic Catholics say that they would vote for Biden.
When we look at white evangelicals and Black Protestants and even Latino Catholics and how they process this election and issues, that race and ethnicity probably factors more into how they view this political situation, discourse perhaps, more than faith. And you will see, I believe, white evangelicals and people who are perhaps not evangelicals, but still white, seeing issues related to race pretty similarly. Same going with Black Protestants and people who are Black but not Protestant Christians, viewing things very similarly. And for that reason, I think it is race and ethnicity that is often the primary identity through which people engage politics more so than their faith.
I have spent my adult life surrounded by people who are exercising their faith in the political sphere. So this concept is not new to me. Going to Catholic school, being a Catholic, it's always been taught to me that we have to engage. And especially in this moment of crisis, I see many lay people and others who don't identify religiously stepping up to engage in community service and to take care of one another. But I also have seen people paying closer attention to our political process, and both of those are necessary. And so I go back to what I said at the beginning, which is about discernment. I really got to this place of deciding to run because I discerned it. I prayed about it. I talked to people who had done it before, and I felt compelled to make a difference.
That's just a small sample of the kind of conversations we have at our initiative. You get a sense of how rich the dialogue is and how we can bring people together across the lines of race and ethnicity and politics and ecclesiology. We're very proud of the fact that so many of our participants are women and people of color. Frankly, as an older white guy, when you put politics and the church together, you end up often with old white guys talking to each other. That's not who the initiative is, I can say. We've learned a lot of lessons, not just that lesson. We've learned that there is a hunger for a moral vocabulary, for a way of talking about these matters that brings us together. And we think Catholic social teaching provides that vocabulary. We have learned when we went online after COVID that there's a hunger across the country and around the world. We were doing a dialogue on racism, and Cardinal Turkson from the Vatican emailed me and said, can I get in on the dialogue? And we found a way to get the Cardinal in on the dialogue. One of the lessons we've learned is there are no speeches. The President of the United States didn't get to give a speech. He was on a panel on poverty with people who disagree. And mostly we learned that we need diverse voices. We're proud to have David Brooks and E.J. Dionne and Michael Gerson and Sister Carol and lots of people you've heard about, read about. But we're even more proud to have a restaurant owner in the middle of COVID crisis, a cafeteria worker, a dreamer. One of the things we've learned is Pope Francis is very much an asset. In his simple ways and powerful words, he shows us a way forward in the middle of a lot of trouble. And we've learned that our work is more important than ever. We actually did a survey of people who have been coming to our events. I was a little nervous about that. And we had more than 1,000 people respond. And they said that this work, and frankly, your work, and the work of the Teach-In is more important than ever. In the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of an economic collapse, in the middle of an election, in the middle of a church that's wounded by scandal, we need to find ways to bring people together, to focus on our principles, to advance the common good, and lift up those who have been left behind. And so I hope you will join us. Many of you have been a part of our dialogues, but I think on the screen you will see a way to add your name so you can join in these discussions. You can hear people who you want to hear, but you can also ask them questions, and you can be a part of an alternative to the way things have been going on for too long in our church and in our country. We're very pleased to have been part of this gathering and hope you'll be a part of our gatherings in the future. As we bring this session to a close, I want to share a moment with you. David Brooks is not a Catholic. He's not a part of Georgetown. He writes for the New York Times and is on the NewsHour, but he's been part of several of our dialogues. And we were talking about how COVID was touching people and how the principles of our faith can shape a response. And this Jewish conservative intellectual who writes for the New York Times asked a really simple question. Why is Catholic social teaching Catholic? I want you to hear what he had to say, because it describes the work of the Teach-In, the work you do every day, and the work of our initiative.
I often think, why is Catholic social thinking Catholic? Like, why did the Catholics come up with it? And I think it's in part a belief in a triune God. There's a belief in an interdependent entity, which is the source of all life. There's a belief that in order to achieve unity with Christ, you have to achieve unity with the people that Christ gave himself for. And so there's just built into the faith and into the church is a more communal, interdependent ethos. And out of that, you don't have to be Catholic to profit from that ethos. And just to finish where EJ did with dignity, I think we lose a lot when we lose the concept of the soul, that each person has an infinite soul. And I think we lose a lot when we lose the concept that each person is made in the image of God. And if you put that at the center of your social worldview, and you could be a little more conservative as I am on economics and things, or you could be more liberal, but you'll probably be heading in the right direction.